of the Kulin Nation in Victoria, Melbourne, Australia. So I'd like to pay my respects to our traditional owners and acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. So Financial Inclusion Week is a fantastic global week that's celebrated by the Center for Financial Inclusion. So we are so proud to be participating in this week today. And the second webinar that we're having is part of a partnership that Move 78, CEO Mariko, and Financial Resilience Australia, which is myself, have announced this week. I'd like to be able to acknowledge everyone who's joined us in today, but I'll leave that to Mariko, who's going to introduce our wonderful panelists for today.
Thank you, Vinita. And thank you to all the panelists and our attendees today for joining us for this great panel, Fintech for Inclusion in Asia. We are so excited to have all three panelists with us. And what makes this panel so unique is that they represent three very different points of view around this very important topic. We have investment banking represented, nonprofit leadership represented, as well as an entrepreneur and solutions provider. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this panel, Frank Troise. He is the managing director for SoHo Advisors, the leading investment bank in APAC for fintech capital raising and M&A. And he's a frequent keynote speaker and also well known to the MAS as a thought leader and was recently appointed as an ambassador to the Singapore FinTech Festival. So I'll leave it to you, Frank, to introduce our illustrious panelists.
Perfect. Thank you, Mariko, and thank you, Vinita. Good as always to see you. And again, thank you for letting us attend here today. And to be very candid for our listeners and viewers, I feel like the odd man out. So I think it's a bit of an oxymoron to think of investment bankers as doing anything altruistically for anyone. So all sarcasm is warranted in my direction, and I will duly receive it in kind. Really looking forward to the discussion today. I've had the opportunity to know Krishna and Jonathan, and I think we're going to have a fun discussion. I wish I could tell you that there was things going on in the world that would make this more interesting. For example, if we had some political volatility that might add some value to the conversation. If we had a global pandemic, one could only wish. But ironically, here we are. We're in the midst of a huge, tragic, perfect storm. And I think in an odd way, I've looked at this as there must be a higher calling, truly, in the fact that I think I could speak for Jonathan and Krishna, where we really do feel we're in the right place at the right time and can really move the needle here in Southeast Asia. So with that, why don't I do this? Because I'm going to do a terrible job of it. And Jonathan, I don't know how, as an entrepreneur, you do not have gray hair. You're smiling. You have all your teeth. You seem happy. Maybe for the benefit of the folks watching, do you maybe have a minute or two, just give a quick introduction and overview of what you guys do, and then Krishna after Jonathan, can we throw the ball over to you, and then we'll pick it up and have some fun with some back and forth.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Mariko and Vinata. I do have a lot of gray hair. It's just the lighting of this of my room. Anyway, yeah. So what we do at BeamAndGo is we're what we call a payment and digital marketplace. But the difference between us and a lot of marketplaces out there is we empower migrant workers, and we empower migrant workers by giving them control over how their remittances are spent by their families back home. And the big problem that we solve is what we call remittance leakage and spending abuse. And I'll just kind of give you a story to kind of illustrate that. So when a migrant worker leaves their home, I mean, their whole idea is to work, save money, send money back home to take care of their family. And the way they do that is usually through remittances. And they'll remit money through, let's say, a Western Union or a bank or a digital wallet. And most of the time, probably like 95 to 96% of the time, that money is in the form of cash. And cash is great because cash can be spent on like groceries, pay bills, buy medicine, all that great stuff. But cash could also be abused on drugs, alcohol, and gambling. And that's the problem that BeamAndGo solves. And it's pretty simple. There was a lot of hard work to get it to where it is now. But the concept is pretty simple. And here's kind of the use case. So a migrant worker will go onto our website. They'll say like, I want to send 5,000 pesos to my husband in Manila. And what we'll do, and what they'll also add is, with that 5,000, they can only use it to buy groceries. They can't go gambling with it. They can't go buy drugs. They can't go buy alcohol. They can't lend it to their family members, only groceries. So what we do is we'll generate a code, and the code has a value, 5,000 pesos, and a purpose, groceries. And we send it to the husband. The husband goes to a supermarket that is on our network. And we have about 8,000 locations on our network these days in the Philippines. Gets eggs, rice, milk, whatever, goes to the cashier, shows the code, and pays for the groceries. And that's how we enable or empower migrant workers to control how that spending is done.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And actually, there's a few things there I'd love to follow up on. But if just real quick, Krishna. So you work for this other startup, a new company called MetLife. So maybe you have a minute or two to talk about them and what you do there.
Yes. We're a 150-year-old startup, I think. Yeah, it's a good way to introduce ourselves. I like saying that. We about 150-year-old insurance company. For on the corporate side, we work in more than 40 markets. We've served about 100 million customers, with financial sort of support at the times where they need. And I work for MetLife Foundation. We are a philanthropic arm of MetLife. And we began our journey with when the foundation has been in existence since 1976, but we stepped outside. It was predominantly a US focused effort until 2013, which is when we decided to expand outside of US. So since then, we had our initial focus on financial inclusion, and then we sort of expanded it to what we now call financial health. And I'll be happy to speak more about that. But we basically make grants and impact investments across the region and about across Asia and 4 other regions, including US, Latin America, and Europe and Middle East. I manage MetLife Foundation's work in Asia.
So, and actually, let's dive a layer deeper there, because even though I know the answer to this, and you and I have talked about this at length, and Jonathan, I think this is going to dovetail a lot with the allocation that you have in place in terms of the allocation protocols. But Krishna, maybe for the folks listening, what do we mean by financial health? And actually, and I'm going to put some context on this that I think you both can have some fun with. So I recently, on Netflix, there's a great series about, in Krishna, you're nodding head, you know exactly what I'm referring to. And one of the companies that they talk about is the Sahara company, and what occurred with trying to create a behavior of savings among the poor, and what happened to that company. So in the back of your minds, let's keep that there for some context. But Krishna, and again, I think the way that you describe financial health and the importance of that is crucial, especially for the world's poor. But for folks listening in, how would you define financial health for them?
Sure. So a couple of pointers, right? One, let's just take an example of perhaps one of the ideal clients from or users of Jonathan's BeamAndGo solution, right? So a lot of people, are what does inclusion mean? Right? Inclusion means they have a bank account, they might have a mobile wallet, they perhaps have a loan from whatever, a pawn shop or wherever, right? And they might have a loan-linked insurance if that Fintech or an MFI is offers that. So in all sort of traditional sense, they are included, right? They're financially, but I think the more important question here is, are they financially healthy or not? And more often than not, and there is a lot of data around, we can again have some conversations, but like the question is she, are they able to manage their cash flows well? Are they able to pay their bill on time? Do they have emergency savings? Do they have and are they saving for their long-term goals? Even, simple goals as educating, for what they care about is growing their business, making a house, educating their children, And are they protected against shocks like these or other normal shocks that we all are protected against? So these are financial health questions, right? And just 30 more seconds on that, one thing where we began with an inclusion focus. So a lot of the times the conversations at least the policymaker and level was before at least a few years, and thankfully now it's changing. It's like, oh, 90% people have bank accounts and 80% people have credit cards, and depending on the market. So, these people are included. And it almost gave a feeling that our job is done, like people are having accounts and using accounts and or having a loan. So, well, they are included. But it's a very binary term, inclusion in that sense. And we think, financial health, one puts the customer, the people who we work for, right in the center of it. Right? When you talk about financial health, you have to talk about them and not your product, services, and technology. I can go on and on about it, but I hope it gives sort of paints a picture. Yeah.
Well, to that, and Jonathan, I'd like to subtly rephrase some of what Krishna is alluding to, because there's an interesting subtlety to the discussion, because to your end, in terms of what you're looking at BeamAndGo, where it's the appropriate allocation of those monies. And I think that, so ultimately at the end of the day, you're trying to, I want to be careful how I phrase this, but the ethical use of the money, or maybe consistency in terms of expectations about.
Oops. Frank, you just went on mute.
Yep, sorry about that. That was unintended. How receptive are people to that? Because Krishna, one of the things that and I want to spend some time on this, because ultimately, do we really, the question I'm really asking is, ultimately, do we want the end user making those decisions? And so, Jonathan, anecdotally, have you found it being, educated children saying, I'm sending the money back home and I know that there's better than a 50% chance it's going to go on betting the horses? Or what's the behavior that you're seeing?
Yeah, maybe I could take a step back from that, or add a little bit more background to the answer to this question. Is that we also see it the same way as Krishna. It's not just giving the tools, it's really kind of utilizing the tools, because for many of our customers, their issue is not like, how do they get savings, right? I mean, become a millionaire. They're just trying to put food on the table.
Yep.
The big thing for a lot of our customers, they want their kids to go to school. They want to have electricity on so that they can do their homework. They want to have proper, nutrition. So like I said, their kids can go to school, they can graduate, so that their kids don't have to leave, the country to go work as a domestic helper or to work as a service staff. Like, there is a future for their kids. That's what a lot of the migrant workers, at least our customers, are hoping for, right? This is the sacrifice. And one of the stories I always say for our customers is, I heard that, Frank, you're talking earlier, you have an 18-year-old daughter. I don't know if Krishna, if you have kids, but a lot of them have kids. And I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I'm away. When I go on a business trip for 3 days, I go crazy. I'm like, I miss my daughter so much. I can't wait to go back home. These migrant workers, they're gone for years. Yeah. We hear stories of them saying like, I was going to go for a 2-year contract. I ended up being in Singapore for 15 years because they just never saved enough money, and they never used the money, or it got wasted, and they never saw their kids grow up. By the time they go back home, it's like their kids is like, graduating from high school. So to kind of answer your question, is the misconception is that beneficiaries are wasting the money and they're bad people, but the reality is a lot of it comes down to like just not understanding like how to use money. It's like part of it is financial literacy, and we work with NGOs, we work with senators in the Philippines to kind of proliferate financial literacy. And I'm not talking about financial literacy as like, buying a bond or, like investing in the stock market or dollar cost averaging. Not that. We're talking about like just responsible savings. Like instead of going to Starbucks, you go to the local place to get coffee. Instead of buying Levi jeans, there might be cheaper jeans. It's like how to spend your money more responsibly. And you should see what happens when we do these financial literacy work, we call them workshops, is we invite family members, it could be the kids, it could be the husbands of the migrant workers, into these workshops. And some of them are as big as like 500 people. And they get it. You could see like almost like a light bulb kind of, like flashes on their head. They see that, oh, okay, there's a better way for my family than what we've been doing before. And that's kind of like where, like, our tool is just really a tool, right? You still have to kind of educate, you still have to kind of give them guidance, maybe the parameters upon which, like how money is earned, how money can be spent, what it is used for as a tool. So just quickly, one of the biggest ones we did, I started the talk by saying, the misconception is money is the root of all evil, but it's not really the root of all evil. It's just like how you use that money. And that started off the workshop. And then we talked about all these things on, just responsible spending, and just how like it can be used to, to help educate, to keep the light bulb on, right? To keep the lights on, so that the family has a chance to kind of get out of, this cycle of not really poverty, but just, low income living, basically.
How have you seen the adoption in that amongst users? Because in a way, again, the issue that you're dealing with, which is very important, is the misallocation of the money. So somebody back home just burning it on something, that wouldn't be appropriate. How have you found the uptake on that? I mean, there must be an interesting conversation.
Like, we expected like a lot of pushback, especially from the husbands.
Yeah.
And you do get that, and you do see it in a very passive aggressive way. Like, I can't find the supermarket, I don't know how to use this, and things like that. But for the most part, we do have a really good retention rate, because it is basic needs. And it not only means that it works for the migrant worker, the one who's sending, but it also works on the other side. And it's not always just husband, it could be the kids too, right? The kids are getting like spending money for their snacks, or it could be the mom who's getting medicine from pharmacies. And it's welcome. It's welcome that they have this opportunity to get all this stuff. I mean, I think, Philippines is still a very cash driven society, and that's changing. And part of it is because of COVID. But we can see the acceptance, and maybe I talk about later, like some of the things we're also doing with NGOs, like the Grameen Foundation. We're doing something with UNICEF. So it's the kind of just not only just to get more people involved, but also to broaden that whole financial literacy aspect of the tools that we give.
Krishna, let me ask you a tough question. I mean, as again, all kidding aside, representing a very, very large institution, is there an internal discussion around the practicality of do you invest the time and energy in that education, or, and again, forgive me for being cynical, Jonathan, or do you just simply say, this is the correct thing to do and you need to do this? I mean, how much, so it's like the old metaphor, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I mean, at what point, I mean, has that discussion been there in terms of the utility of that education versus just simply saying, hey, here's the framework and it's either this way or nothing?
A lot. And I'm trying to, again, make sure I don't go wrong, but financial education has been sort of, it is a little like, I don't know, love, it's used, abused. And when we do financial education, I mean, like what it means different things to different people. We call that, we try and like use edu action. So our sort of philosophy around it, and then there is a lot. I think it's so at the very highest level, the answer boils down to how, when you do it. It's not what you do, right? So there is really useless financial education, and there is really useful financial education. And how do you know the difference? So for us, where we try to do is, that the education and the outcomes of that education, the outcome should be measurable of that education. And two, how do you do that? Is to make sure that, that there is a very direct, clear and immediate bridge to actually practicing that, accessing that solution, right?
Yeah.
So it is not about, putting for us, you in our portfolio of hundreds of grants, there is not perhaps like, there's hardly, except for children, there is no grant to adults, which is only about education.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be basically, and again, in summary, it has to be linked with actual usage of financial services that we're talking about. And we have to be able to measure that sort of delta of change, right? So that's the short answer. And there is, there is a lot of, in US, there is just a lot of material available, meta studies done on why on US government spends about $700-800 million a year. And there are meta sort of analysis of that, is that the effectiveness of at least their approach is 0.1, 0.2%, basically nil. And there is a lot sort of, so, there is good financial education and there is not. This is,
And let me, and again, forgive me, I recognize you have to be potentially careful about how you answer this. So I want to respect that. So let me take the heat for part of the challenge here. But one of the things in the States that was a big transition, especially in the pension plans, was when they moved from what was called a defined benefit program to defined contribution. They basically said, we as a corporation are no longer taking responsibility and we're pushing it to the end user. And to your point, again, I'll speak for myself. I thought the process was very hypocritical because they were quote unquote financially educating people, but really all they were doing was meeting the minimum requirements of the regulators to say, we said something we think was impactful and we think they understood it. But the reality was they really didn't care. They were just transferring the liability from one entity to all these individuals. So I think the subtlety of what you're saying is important because, pardon the metaphor, to use the religious reference, the idea here, I think what you're really saying is if you want to, you're going to teach a man to fish so that he can teach everybody else. And I think, Jonathan, to your point, what there's a behavior characteristic in this that you're trying to engender. But part of me, and I say this respectfully, part of me feels that the target demographic, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And again, back to your point, Jonathan, they are literally on day-to-day survival. So I mean, to take 15 minutes out and say, oh, here's the benefit, I'll just make this up. Here's the benefits of compounding. I mean, they have no bandwidth for this and nor should they. They have a lot of other things that are higher priority.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, and that's a good point. Like how do you do it, right? Do you, just educate and hope they take it? Or do you kind of have to pound them over the head? I mean, I used to live in New York. I used to live in the US for most of my life. And I always thought that, the way we did things in the US with a lot more freedom than I do have here in Singapore was the way to go until I moved to Singapore. Mm-hmm. And Singapore is awesome. I mean, I'm just blown away by like how everything is here. And I've been living here for almost 20 years now. But to what Krishna is saying, yeah, it's really tough, right? And you kind of said it too, Frank, because they're living day to day, so it's super tough. It reminds me of something that happened last year. We've been in business 5 years, and a VC came to me last year after one of these startup shows, and she said, John, like, why do you guys do this? Like, this is like the hardest market, like as a startup, as an entrepreneur, as a business, this is like the hardest thing to crack is people who have very little money, their education level is not that high, the technology, their adoption of technology is low. But, for me, it's just like, these guys have nothing. Like they're kind of almost like in a sandwich class. They are not poor enough to just get a lot of help from the government, but they don't make enough to kind of like, to be on their own, and they're kind of just forgotten. And so it kind of makes me mad that like there's not more out there for them. But anyway, to get back to the question, I think you kind of have to, at the level we're at, me personally, it might not sound politically correct, but sometimes you have to use the hammer and really kind of just say like, hey, look, your life is tough, and we're trying to help you. We talk to migrant workers all the time, and we're just saying like, look, just there are ways to kind of help you along on your day to day, and then there are ways to help you along for the long run, right? And you just got to kind of, you've already made the sacrifice, leaving your family and working so hard. just go the extra step now. Get your family on board. Get, like really control your spending so that your kids have this chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a message we hit home. Now, we don't. It's not exactly like how I say it. Like, we're not always hitting them over the head. I have a partner who's awesome at communicating that message to the end user. We do videos. We work with leaders in the community. We have testimonials. We interview migrant workers like on Facebook Live and in YouTube. So we try to keep it as fun as we can, but the underlying message is still there of financial responsibility.
And to Frank, if I may add a couple of quick
Sure, please.
things to that, right? And then I know in Jonathan's case, they are actually providing a solution to that, right? Problem that they are trying to talk about in education. We call that, it's the analogy, like we all know, right, that we, as you started the conversation, that we should eat well and we should all be healthy and fit and all of that. So, it's not, but how many of us can actually, a lot of us don't actually end up doing it, right? It's a gym versus use. So it's not and two, it's a little like, these things for adults are a little like basketball or swimming, they're not physics or maths. So, you can only do so much putting them in class. It's like teaching people how to swim by just showing them, telling them or showing them videos. It's just never going to work unless you bloody show them the pool and let them jump, right? So that's where sort of the importance of actual solutions being there for them to use with intentionality, such as Jonathan mentions, is important. Without that, education for me is just pointless. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do we think about this then? If we took a step back, I remembered years ago, I'm searching for what the presentation was that I saw, but it was with a very dear friend of ours from the Gates Foundation, and they were, I apologize, I don't recall the company, but they were talking about how in Africa, on the one hand, they had enabled the technology to make loans to the farmers.
Yep.
For seed, so they could plant their crops. And then on the other end of it, they had enough information from a data perspective where they could sell the crops. So the farmer, their actual utility, not to be cavalier, but their actual utility was digging a hole in the ground and then harvest. That was it. It was they were right in the middle of that value chain. And what the technology was doing was there's a couple ways to look at it, but I like to think is they were removing the arbitrage in terms of the farmer mistakenly buying too much seed, and on the other end they were closing out the ability for everything gets sold, and it's done very, very efficiently. But Krishna, you're alluding to a key point when we think about financial services, because again I go back to, and Jonathan, I think you inferred this as well. We all know that the things that we assume as fact actually are a function of us understanding long-term math and trends. So we know what behaviors will do over 10, 20, 30 years. We're thinking about retirement. We're thinking about multi-generational issues. So we can defer that enjoyment in terms of doing that. But Jonathan, back to your point,
yeah.
And again, Krishna, forgive me, like on the insurance side, Krishna, half of it is, I'm smoking cigars, I'm skydiving, and I'm riding motorcycles. But when I'm filling out that policy information, none of that information somehow gets on the policy that you guys end up underwriting. And I always go back to the old joke that if Google told you everything that I'm looking at, neither of you would probably talk to me today relative to what I'm looking at on the web versus hopefully how I appear today. Yeah. So given that disparity between consumer behavior and what people are predisposed to do, is it just a function of, at the end of the day, are we really saying we're trying to create a gradual change because the reality is human beings are human beings and we can't change that? Or I go back to, do we just grab the car and say, no, we need to be more involved in this? Because Jonathan, the one thing that I think we're also not saying is this is also a private public sector question, because do you really want the private sector, again, because who's your best customer if you're looking only at bottom line and profits, is somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, has money to spend, and you just keep pounding on that.
Yeah.
So I guess the question, Jonathan, to you is, I mean, is this a public-private sector thing? And in that decision, what responsibility does the counterpart ultimately have?
The counterpart being the customer, or
No, actually, so if it was private sector, so if it was just a public company saying, hey, we think, Jonathan, we're going to take what you do, or at the end of the day, to your point on Singapore, is this a function that maybe one of the regulators says, no, Jonathan needs to be, quote unquote, almost like the CPF. He needs to be part of the government framework.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, we deal in the Philippines. Singapore is one of our markets because that's where a lot of migrant workers from the Philippines work. So that's a really tough question to answer because, like, you're right. Where does that line stop, right? And man, I wish I had a very clear-cut answer to this. And we do work with government agencies in the Philippines. I don't know, Frank.
No, it's okay.
I don't really know. I mean, I guess one of the things is that there's so much inefficiency in how everything is kind of presented and the frameworks that are available, that the best that we can do is really just try to optimize that. And I'm not talking about just inefficiency of like how money goes from the migrant worker to the family members and how they use it, but I'm also talking about the inefficiencies as a business operating in this type of business. Just as a quick example, it maybe doesn't really answer, it doesn't answer this question, but anecdotally, it's like we still have to a branch bank to make settlement payments, and that's kind of like
that's amazing.
The level that we're working at. I mean, even though we do work with, like I said, NGOs and LGUs, like local government units, and even like up to the senator level, it's really still just to help. Like, I mean, I don't really foresee like how policy changes are coming about because of what we're doing yet. I don't know if it's too early or if it's maybe it'll never come around, and just as a private company, the market's going to decide like how effective we are, and we're not, and we do have opinion letters from the BSP, the central bank, that say we're not a regulated entity, and things like that. So yeah, so I don't really know right now. Maybe it's a little too early for me to tell you, but yeah, I guess we'll see. We'll see as traction happens and more people get helped, and if the government wants to kind of step in. Yeah,
good stuff. Hey, Krishna, maybe just to shift gears, because we've and for the sake of introducing a new topic, how when we think about financial inclusion, and again, I think we're all being very polite around some of these themes, so I'd like to continue to explore it. I like what you are saying regarding financial health. So on the one hand, it's very easy for me as a financial institution, if I was to pretend, to say, great, I'm going to open the doors to everybody, so everybody can do whatever they want when they come in. But I'm not assuming any responsibility for what people are doing. It's like just being in a casino. All I've done is just lowered the minimums. I've said, just come in and you can bet $1 on the slots and off you go. What do you see as the components? So on the one hand, you've got a lot of people jumping into financial inclusion, but I think all that is just do what you're doing, do it smaller, so everybody can have market entry. How should we really be thinking about holistically financial health? Because I think that's a dimension here. And should we be looking at financial inclusion through the lens of financial health?
Yeah, those are a lot of questions. Let me try and unpack some of the sort of elements of it, right? One, when we say we, of course, there is on that spectrum from a regulator to an institution, a financial provider, of course, both type of entities will have a different role to play, but and as you said, see that as a spectrum, access of financial services, usage, and access usage, and then it's health, financial health. So So the question is how should, let's say, how should a provider look at it? Let's first provider, right? So for me, let me start with an example. So what is the difference between so if I have a payments company, right? My goal, let's say, if I were a normal payments company, my goal is to just make sure that my whatever client users are making as many payments as possible. So I will remove all the friction possible from that, the pay and wave, and play all the behavioral sort of tricks in my book to make sure that people are constantly paying and they feel the need to do so, right? There is again a very interesting research, I forgot the name, but it's like almost, that pay and wave is almost akin to sort of a cocaine addiction, right? How frictionless and easy do you make it? But if I were a financial health focused payment company, yes, I do want to make payments easy, but I also at times, where it's needed, I might add a friction to that process and say that, what, maybe do you want to put some money aside, and not in a patronizing way, but there are ways to do it. So that's like the most simple example of it at a very philosophical level, and this is not saying that, anybody who's not focused on financial health is a bad provider, but also there is black, there is gray, and there is white, right? So yeah, I mean, broadly, again, fundamentally, it is about what I believe. So I believe that if you are really if you care about the financial health of your customer, you would do things one differently, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to compromise on your profit or on your success sort of metrics, whatever those are, right? Take as a credit, right? I want to build, there are a lot of pawn shops or money lenders operating masking as fintechs, right? And then there are organizations who are trying to help these clients build a credit score. There are organizations who will not lend you if you've already taken other organizations and so on and so forth, right? So there is ways to lend responsibly, and there is then you can just pretend that you are a cool fintech, and same for gambling and so on and so forth. So I think that intentionality is critical, right? Of why am I doing this, and it doesn't necessarily have to always, it might be a longer path, but it doesn't necessarily always have to compromise, on profitability. And for a regulator, it's a different conversation, and I'm happy to go there if that's of interest, but I'll take a pause. Yeah.
I want to come back to the regulatory part of this, because there's a, and Jonathan, I want to go to you for a second and expand on something Krishna said, where one of the things that's happened now in a COVID world, and it's been very, very subtle, has been, look how quickly the three of us here in Singapore, by default and very passively, abdicated control of privacy on our mobile phones. So we and we all laugh and smile, and we know that we're being tracked, and we know that. Yep. But we actually take comfort in that, if we're being brutally honest. And in this environment, we're seeing the benefit of that. Yep. And to use, Krishna, your health metaphor, which I think is important. I mean, we're now seeing with COVID a systemic threat to the system. It's had an impact on GDP. We know, not only here, but globally, we're walking into a recession going into 2021. So the health literally has been impacted as a function of COVID. But the interesting outcome was the abdication of privacy as a function of this. So Jonathan, as we look at this in a perverse way, has COVID helped you in terms of the ability for you now to say, yes, there is a health proposition to what we're doing relative to, and especially now in a COVID world, and do you now have the ability to say, hey, look, if we have access to more data and we can provide a much more holistic solution, or has COVID negatively impacted you relative to where you were 9 to 12 months ago?
Yeah, I mean, the problem that we solve was pre-COVID, post-COVID, it's going to be post-COVID. I mean, it's such a basic problem of what we call remittance leakage and spending abuse, and the lack of the ability to allocate funds properly. So COVID or no COVID, that problem doesn't go away. But what has happened is with COVID to our customer base, there was a pretty big change in the beginning of COVID. There was a lot of retrenchment. there's about 340,000 migrant workers from the Philippines that lost their jobs, had to be repatriated, and they're still being repatriated, meaning like they're still like kind of haven't cleared quarantine, and they're going through that whole process in whether it's in Manila or in Cebu or wherever they land to kind of get out of that. And the projection about 6 months ago was it's going to be over 1 million will be retrenched. Now we're hearing that it's actually not going to be that much. And I'm not sure if it's because they're expecting a softer landing for COVID, or it's just that the demand for the services of these migrant workers will continually be at the rate that it was pre-COVID. Now, for us as a company, we actually, I'm not going to say we benefited it, but there were things that we did that helped our company. So we pivoted some of our, not pivoted, that's not the right word, but we added different services to our platform that helped migrant workers and their families. And a lot of them revolved around delivery, so that people didn't have to go out to go get their groceries, like things get delivered. The other thing was, I mentioned earlier that we work with Grameen Foundation now. They sought us out because one of the things is they're giving financial aid to women, and the way they used to do it is they used to do it in the form of just giving them cash. And cash is like, as I mentioned earlier, it's very hard to trace, right? Like once you give $100 or 5,000 pesos to somebody, it's pretty much, it's up to them to do the right thing. So they saw what we were doing and they said, what if we did everything through the BeamAndGo platform? And so we worked with JP Morgan, we worked with Grameen Foundation and a bunch of MFIs in the Philippines, as well as a company called SoHo. And we're able to, exactly what you're saying, track how that money is being spent. So it moves from when the money comes in to a person's account, and then how they use it. Like, when do they redeem it? What are they buying? What are they using it for? So I mean, that was always there for us, but other companies are kind of seeing it. Like we've also been talking to a bunch of other NGOs when they found out what we're doing, and they say, wow, we'd love to leverage this system because we have no, it's really opaque, right? Like when the money is sent, like there's no transparency. And we love the fact that we can know what's happening with the money that we hand out for a couple of reasons. One is just they know that it's not being abused. But the other thing too is with all this data, they could kind of restructure or reformulate their CSR campaigns or their financial aid campaigns to better suit their beneficiaries. So it's just more data points for them to kind of customize or just build a better CSR campaign in the future.
Interesting. And how between the both of you, Krishna, you're in a great position where at 50,000 feet you see a lot of flow, and Jonathan, to your credit, I think what you're doing is very, very important, and kudos to you. Thanks. For the work that you and your team are doing. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that I think, Krishna, for you and I, as investors working with investors, so I'm getting the sense that the financial inclusion, I'm not seeing entrepreneurs jumping into it. There are people like you, Jonathan, who are there and are very passionate about it. But Krishna, do you see entrepreneurs focusing on inclusion, or do you see them being slightly more nuanced and maybe more, maybe not as focused on it?
Well, we see quite a lot. So we, across again the 4 regions and specifically to India, we run several sort of inclusive fintech and financial inclusion challenges where we invite startups who focus on financial health and inclusion. So we run several. I don't know, some of you might have heard of Inclusive Fintech 50 that we joined with Visa, IFC, and BlackRock. We've been running it for the last couple of years. So we get 600 odd applications about. We run financial health. So every time we kind of, and we do it a little more often than we should perhaps, but no, so there is, we don't see, there is a lot of there's talent, there is people like Jonathan, that you often wonder, why would they spend so much time behind something that is such a wicked problem to solve, right? It's so difficult. Very well walk and do something which is a little more sort of palatable to investors, that high margins and whatnot. But no, we are I mean, the way I see, there is a lot of talent which is motivated by that purpose. Of course, it's a hard thing to do, but we don't. And part of it is also making, part of the reason for that success is also having the right environment, right, regulatory and market environment, where you are able to do that work effectively in form of eKYC and open digital ecosystems and whatnot. So it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but we see a lot of traction and interest. Yeah.
It's good to hear. And, to pick on Jonathan, I was going to say that, Jonathan, as Krishna was complimenting you on the hard problem that you're solving, I was going to say, Krishna, what we didn't realize is that he's got a fifth of whiskey in that water bottle. So that's
yeah, no, I wouldn't blame him for that.
Well, one of the things that I just wanted to follow up on what Krishna said. So we were talking about financial inclusion, and we're actually part of a cohort with an NGO, and in this cohort, it is for fintech, but it actually touches more than just like a digital wallet or a loan. It actually touches agriculture. Like I think you guys mentioned it before. Like, how do you eliminate that arbitrage or that middleman, so that it's more like farm to table, and then the farm makes more money and is more sustainable. It's also edutech. It's also credit scoring. It's also AI to do things like better insurance and things like that. And this is all in the cohort that we're part of right now. And it's all fintech. It's all like, it's all fintech, and it all kind of leads towards financial inclusion, financial health. So yeah, I mean, maybe because it's the circles that I run in, just like Krishna, it's like we do see a lot. And yeah, I mean, 600 people who applied to Financial Inclusion 50, we were one of them. We also applied, and you always hear it, like, any type of thing, like if there's anything kind of social impact, like a contest for startups, there's a lot of companies globally that participate. And maybe you don't hear about them as much because maybe they're not as sexy as some of the other, the other startups that, get the $1 billion, valuation in, 5 years, 6 years. It does take a little longer for social impact, financial inclusion, especially working in these markets.
Well, and to your point, the other thing which is important is actually there's a social good to what you're doing, and I think we respectfully need to be careful. I think it would be inappropriate to compare you to some of the quote unquote unicorns who are not profitable, and it's just they're still waiting for that value proposition to prove out. Because I think to Krishna's point earlier, we could view many of these as almost transactional in terms of what they're doing. And I think that the tough part there is, Krishna, to go back to your regulatory point that you made earlier, if we were to look at the region and there's going to be a number of people looking at this in terms of the recorded version. So let's assume, and I'm going to pick on my American colleagues because they're easy to pick on, but as they listen to this, and if we were to now say to them, look, as you look at Southeast Asia, this is the way that you need to look at it. I mean, one is, and John, you alluded to this as well. I mean, in Singapore, we have the benefit of a regulator who gets it. So the MAS really understands what's needed. But to your point, the core market's actually the Philippines in terms of where the users are. And we've seen this catch-22 as folks try to get their arms around even Indonesia and the inefficiency in that market. So maybe as a concluding question, I think, Krishna, for you, given the regulatory lens, some regulators get it, some are trying to get it. How do you marry that relative to the regional politics and underlying population demographics? So and John, I think this will be interesting to hear your perspective, because obviously you had the choice of many places to go. So you went to the Philippines for a reason, But I think for listeners of the broadcast, it'd be interesting to maybe bring it back a notch and tell folks how you got there. But Krishna, from your standpoint, if I'm a US fintech, I'm coming to Southeast Asia, how should I be thinking about, how you see the region through the lens of a regulator versus at the same time the demographic opportunity that's there?
Yeah, again, a big question. I'll take a more broader Asia lens. We have a couple of countries in Southeast Asia in our sort of portfolio, but not all. And again, different markets are exciting for different reasons and different solutions. But at a very high level, two of the most exciting markets are kind of the two of the most obvious ones. India and China, they are of course difficult and exciting for different reasons, right? One, I'll point out a couple of reasons, right? One, I think let's talk about India, right? I think where they're headed, at least, at a leadership level, there is a clear sort of intent, right? We're not talking about the actions and outcomes. That's going to be a long, painful road. Intent is there about they understand the use of technology to make things efficient, to empower people and whatnot in different domains, right? And there is leadership level sort of buy-in. But well, there's one that, but what they're doing, I don't know if you've managed to, I think you should, for listeners, they should look at these open digital ecosystems that India is trying to build. It started with Aadhaar, their unique identity. That was the identity layer. On top of that, they are doing a consent layer, right, which is documentation, and which is where your point to privacy comes, right? That for me, yes, I want my data to be used, but I want to control who uses it, so I think India is in that sort of phase of creating an amazing consent architecture on paper right now. And then on the top of that, once you have identity payment, consent payment, and then you can lay a lot of other things from health insurance to credit to whatnot. So India, for me, in that, just because of its that journey of open digital ecosystems, is fascinating. China, for a different bunch of reasons. One, it's just the flow of investments, the amount of talent, the government sort of approach of try first and then we will regulate, instead of regulate first and then we will. So India, China being for me the most exciting markets in terms of these innovations and well, just about half of the world, about 40% of the world anyways lives there. So that gives you a lot of captive base. Indonesia, Philippines being the next, and again, it's a matter of your solution, right? So if you're talking about financial health focused solutions, so there markets like Australia, where the open banking and account aggregate flourishing, and they've started. So markets like Malaysia and Australia, from the financial health perspective, is, I think it's difficult to give a sort of one answer to that, but it depends on what your solution is. But Asia is extremely vibrant and exciting, I think. Yeah.
Jonathan, how do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see it through Philippines, and I also because living here in Singapore, and I just not just to kind of toot their horn, but I really think MAS has done a great job, not only in COVID, but kind of making it super clear for fintechs to operate. They came up last year with the Payment Services Act. And it went through a lot of discussion. It wasn't like very heavy-handed. It was actually discussions with a lot of players, including people like us. I mean, we had surveys to fill out. We spoke with consultants from that group, and they came out with, I think, a very fair, very balanced, well-articulated Payment Services Act, which kind of takes away, if you operate in this space, it's like one of the things you don't want is a lot of ambiguity. And it's so clear. I mean, okay, it's not so clear. I mean, there are gray areas, but you could have an open discussion with them about these gray areas. And that's the benefit that you have here in Singapore, because it's small, right? I mean, it's 4 million people. The downside is you just don't have the sample size as India or China, right? And maybe it takes it longer to get it exactly right. But the path that they've taken, I think, it has been really good. And and you can see it, right? There's a lot of fintechs that come out of here, and a lot of fintechs in other countries domicile here because of that. And I wish it was like that in everywhere. Like, like we have a company also in Hong Kong, we have a company in Taiwan, and we do talk to the regulators there too. And it's not that clear. It's not that clear. And, there have been stories of companies that just, kind of took that China approach, which is like, we're just going to do it. And then let's see what happens. And, one of them, one story is like the guy's facing like 10 years in prison for money laundering. Right. And, it's like, obviously as you run a company, that's the last thing you want to happen. But to kind of get back to your question about like, how did we get into this? And there is a reason why we're in the Philippines. My parents are from the Philippines, and they migrated to New York, where I kind of spent a lot of my childhood and young adult life. And everybody from the team, and it wasn't by design, it just happened this way. Everyone from the team was either a migrant worker before or had parents that were migrant workers or are migrant workers.
Oh, wow.
And that was just kind of like, I still have family in the Philippines. My sister lives there, my uncles and aunts. And it was just something that it was a known problem. It was a known problem. I mean, like this is a 30-year problem, right? It's like when the migration of a lot of Filipino workers, like my dad, my mom, to present day, it's all of them have this problem. And it's pretty sad because you see, because the Filipinos are a very close-knit family, and you see a lot of like, because of this being apart, families just start to break down. And it's not just financial inclusion, it's really the breakdown of families that is as a result of this. And 2 years is great. You save your money, you go back, your kids get to go to school, you build your house. But if it's 15 years, it's really heartbreaking on a family.
Unbelievable. Well, gentlemen, this has been par for the course. We probably could have kept going for another hour or two. So so thank you both. And I think you've done a very, very good job of validating the fact where we started, that as an investment banker, we add no value to society. You two are truly doing something wonderful for people and adding to the social good. So it's been an delight to have this conversation with both of you today. And we look forward to continuing it. And with that, I will thank our audience for listening in and viewing this presentation. And Mariko and Benita, were there any final words that you wanted to share with folks as we wrapped up?
No, we're good.
We're good. Yes, just thank you so much for such an engaging discussion. I think everyone has really enjoyed it. And we can't wait to invite you back for another session.
Yes.
Great.
And